Everyone. Thank you so much for coming. We're now going to begin our research talks, and we'll be starting with a presentation from Phyllis Arthur. And Miss Arthur is responsible for working with member companies in vaccines, antimicrobial resistance, molecular diagnostics, and biodefense on policy, legislative, and regulatory issues. Miss Arthur joined Bio in July 2009 as the Director of Healthcare Regulatory Affairs. Prior to joining Bio, she worked in numerous marketing and sales positions for Merck in their vaccine division. Over her 16-year career in vaccines, Miss Arthur launched several exciting new vaccines in the United States and internationally, including the first HPV vaccine, Gardasil. During her years in marketing, she worked closely with clinical and academic thought leaders in infectious diseases, oncology, and public health. In addition, Ms. Arthur also led a large vaccine sales organization of over 75 representatives and managers covering 14 states. Ms. Arthur received her BA in Economics and International Politics from Goucher College and her MBA from the Wharton School of Business at the University of Pennsylvania. Thank you so much for being with us, Ms. Arthur. And you can go ahead and start your presentation.
Okay.
Let me see how that will work. 1 minute.
Thanks. Thanks, Ramya. Actually, it's great. You actually did a lot of the first slide, so I can actually talk more about Gardasil and then segue to talking about bio. Oh, wonderful. Wonderful. Thanks so much for inviting me to join you guys today. I'm really pleased to be here, and I hope we can have a lot of good questions and discussion. So as Rami just said, I went to Goucher College before coming to Merck and got my MBA at Wharton in the University of Pennsylvania. And it was a nice combination of using my economics degree and getting a marketing degree. And then I spent actually a little over 16 years at Merck in the vaccine space. And that's where I came to really love global health and the issue of vaccines, which I think are a great place to work. I did a bunch of different jobs, both in the US and internationally. And definitely one of the proudest moments of my time at Merck was my time working on Gardasil. And here I put the brand name for the new Gardasil, Gardasil 9, but I actually worked on the original product, which was 4 strains, and actually had a really great job on the Gardasil marketing team. I was the scientific lead and really got to work closely with the thought leaders. So I worked with the the different medical groups and provider groups, oncologists, pediatricians, all the different doctors that were touching both, who understood cervical cancer, but also understood vaccination. And what was so great about working on Gardasil was actually that we in those 2 years leading up to before we launched the product, we really spent a lot of time educating different types of healthcare providers and the public on HPV and its relationship to a cancer. And for many, many people, understanding that a virus could actually cause your body to actually make cancerous lesions was very new information. And what made it so fun really was that doctors who understood vaccines, like pediatricians and family practice doctors, didn't really ever treat cancer. And doctors who understood the cancer didn't really understand infectious diseases. And so we really were in a great opportunity to teach many different kinds of providers, pharmacists, nurses, doctors, all about the role that a vaccine could play in not just eliminating an infectious disease, but eliminating a cancer. And so it's probably one of the highlights of my 16 years at Merck was working on the launch of such an important vaccine that's now globally affecting cancer around the world. So very, very happy to have been involved in the scientific side of the marketing on that great vaccine that many people get today. And we've seen the precipitous drop in women having cancer, in men having cancer, and all the steps that come in between. So it's a wonderful thing to work on. Next slide. So in 2008, I left Merck, and in 2009, I came to Bio. BIO is a trade association based in Washington, D.C., that actually works with companies in the in the biotech industry. So we have companies in the health space, companies in the industrial and environmental space working on climate change, working on novel plastics. We have companies in the food and agriculture space working on genetic sequencing. And what these companies all have in common is they leverage biotechnology for innovation in their space. Next slide. So I have a team of, I have an infectious disease team. There's 5 of us. And we split up the wide berth of things that are infectious disease R&D and the companies in this space. So we work on companies that are developing vaccines for both commercial use and also for pandemic preparedness. We work with companies in the biodefense space. That's everything from chemical and biological prevention, things for anthrax and smallpox. We work with companies that are working on new antibiotics and other antimicrobials, and we work with companies that make diagnostics in the infectious disease space. My circle moved, so sorry about that. But obviously, in this last year and a half, my team has been front and center, therefore, leading on Bio's response to COVID-19. And what I'm going to talk about in the rest of my slides are how we as a trade association have been helping our companies work on the response to COVID-19 and the role we can play in that space. Next slide. So just want to level set, as you get a view of the biotechnology industry's response to COVID, one of the things we did early on last year was actually build something, a pipeline tracker to look at what was happening across the vast array of product development for COVID. And so we built this tracker, and you can find it on the bio.org website. And it actually has detailed information about all the different products worldwide that are being developed in either the therapeutic space or the vaccine space, where they're being made, what stage of development they're in. And I think one of the things I'm most proud of being in the biotech industry is how quickly companies went from publication of the genetic sequence data to actually working on products in the clinic. And you see, we went from 0 products to 915 unique drug programs in just 14 months. And most of these are still active, and many of them are now in the clinic. And one of the things we talk about at Bio is that over 70% of those products actually originate from small biotechnology companies, companies with 300 or less employees and maybe no marketed products. Next slide. I call this slide my race car slide, and it really just tracks how we're doing on vaccine development. And it's a snapshot of the global picture. Obviously, you all are interested in global health. You're following what's happening with vaccines, and you're going to have a great talk after this on what's happening specifically with the mRNA vaccine. Very exciting technology that I think will change the way we make vaccines going forward in the future. But you see, there's a lot of different really interesting platform technologies that are being deployed for COVID. And some of these were being used for other vaccines in the past, like Ebola, and had products already on the market. One of them, some of the recombinant protein vaccines were already being used for flu. But some of these technologies were not yet, although they were being researched beforehand, were not yet used in a commercially marketed vaccine. And this is a very exciting time. Think of all the data we'll have on these various platforms, how much more quickly we can develop novel vaccines against other unmet medical needs, and what we're learning and all the capacity we're building worldwide for these vaccines moving forward. So it's a very exciting time in infectious diseases. Next slide. So I was asked to talk specifically about what we've been doing at Bio around COVID. And obviously, once it was identified that this was not just something that was going to come and go like some outbreak viruses do, we started to mobilize around helping our members get the resources they needed to support their research programs and their development programs. In March of last year, we organized a really huge summit. That was our first virtual meeting. We had high-level leaders from the U.S. government come and speak, Dr. Anthony Fauci, Dr. Deborah Birx. Many different people came and spoke to our industry about how they were thinking about responding to the pandemic. And then we had breakout groups where the companies could start to talk about what they were going to need in terms of facilities, in terms of research materials to start to work on their products. And then we created a digital hub on our website where companies could come and almost Craigslist find things they needed. So you were trying to find assays or reagents or a place to actually do a BSL 3 or 4 lab to test your molecule to see if it was active against COVID-19. This was a place for companies to get into the space and get things that they needed. We opened it up as well to governors who were looking for, say, PPE, and some companies would donate their PPE to certain states when they had extra. So this was really a chance to share information and share materials. We created the pipeline tracker. And then we actually started working on mapping the global capacity for certain key kinds of products. So we worked with a company to actually look and see if we were going to be able to scale up all the monoclonal antibodies that were in development. What would it take to find that space? We're a lobbying organization. We worked on advocating for Congress for more money for funding the research and development and procurement. And we really help connect companies. That's one of the key things Bio does. We have a partnering system that allows companies to matchmake. I jokingly call it speed dating for companies, where they set up half-hour meetings. If someone has a molecule or a platform and someone's looking to partner with them, they can get into the system, have meetings, exchange scientific information, and potentially work together on key products. We spent a lot of last year working on some of the regulatory issues with the FDA on behalf of our companies. Many of our companies had a lot of shared questions on how to handle getting to the emergency use authorization. What were the guidelines from the FDA? What were they supposed to do to get there? And we worked with many of our companies to help them work with faith-based and community-based organizations to make sure that they had large diversity in their clinical trials. And then, of course, internationally, we worked a great deal with the setup of COVAX. I think hopefully you all know about that in global health. The first time the US, that many different countries got together to actually try to find a way to bring the vaccines to many different people all over the world in high, middle, and low income countries. And then at the end of the year, we started working on vaccine educational activities. We really wanted to make sure that we were bringing solid, evidence-based, scientific, easy to understand information to both providers and the general public on the COVID-19 vaccines and try to dispel some of the myths that were starting to show up. Next slide. So a lot of that work carried into this year. We actually were worried as much about access to these products as we were, of course, about information on these products and knowing that they were going to be bought by the government. How could we make sure that the US healthcare system provided access so anyone who needed them can get them? So we had several different meetings where we worked on access strategies. How could we make sure that when someone went to get one of the therapeutics, for example, they didn't hit any unintended costs, that while the therapeutic was free, that actually the doctor's fees were free or the infusion center costs were free. And we worked on many of those things with other partners and were successful in the last legislation at getting extra law passed so that all the things surrounding the therapeutics were actually offered at no cost to anyone who needed them. We actually continue to work on regulatory issues. This year is kind of an interesting year. We're in transition. How will the vaccines behind Pfizer, Moderna, and J&J actually do their clinical trials now that there are products on the market? There's always that ethical question. Once there's a viable product, you need to change how you do your trials. How will we be thinking about vaccine development in the context of the variants that are happening? You see companies already starting to do research with modified versions of their vaccine for the variants. Is this going to be a booster strategy? Will it be like flu with multiple strains? There's a lot of really interesting research questions that we need to think through, and we need to think through them worldwide. And the more we vaccinate, hopefully the less variants there will be moving forward. So how do we think about the next stage of vaccines in the context of the variants that are happening in different parts of the world? We're continuing to support COVAX. We're really focusing in this last few months on the supply chain issues for vaccine development. How are we making sure that all those suppliers that make vials and the boxes and the sterile bags for manufacturing and the tubes are actually also scaling up so we can scale up the manufacturing of billions of doses of vaccine, which is not what we normally make worldwide. And then we're certainly working on different ways to help people access the therapeutics. And we actually spent a lot of time this year expanding our vaccine educational activities. And so I just want to take a minute to talk with you about what we're doing on the education side. Next slide. So our goal was actually to enhance people's knowledge and give good information in the light of all the misinformation out there. And we did that in two ways. We created a digital platform, a website with easy to understand questions and answers that people could find. And we also worked with particular core partners to actually make educational outreach activities, particularly focused on communities of color. Next slide. So covidvaccinefacts.org is our website. Please go take a look. We've got about 38 questions on there. We add questions as we've been moving through the science and the rollout of vaccines. New questions have been asked. So at the beginning, it was like, how do we go so fast making these vaccines? How will I know if it's safe? But now we have things like, why do I still have to wear a mask after I've been vaccinated? We just general questions we're hearing as we listen to people have their, try to answer their questions about the vaccine. And instead of kind of like Bing, where you just type in a question and it gives you an answer, it links Sorry. Hopefully that worked. Are we okay?
Yep, we're good now.
Okay,
Good.
Yep.
sorry. That must have been in the house. Sorry. It's the joys of being in someone else's house. So the next slide, last one. In addition, I think what I'm most proud of with our educational activities is how we've partnered with many different multicultural and aging organizations to do trusted messenger education for key populations. And so we've worked with a host of different groups to do educational webinars, to do speaker training, to build website content. And now we're shifting to working with partners that are actually doing on the ground local outreach across different stakeholders to help people get what they need to get vaccinated. So, for example, working with the National Hispanic Council on Aging, they're doing things like helping seniors go through the process of logging on to the website, making sure they have what they need in Spanish, getting people to vaccination sites. So we've tried to transition from educating to actually helping people with access. And I'm very pleased with the work we're doing, including actually doing training sessions for essential workers like those in the different labor unions. We're focusing a lot on farm unions, doing different work in both English and Spanish and other languages. And I think that it's great to be able to turn relatively complicated science into really, hopefully, easy to understand and absorb information that people can trust. And I think we've seen many of our educational activities have helped people become less hesitant and actually sign up to get the vaccine. So these are the kind of things we're working on at Bio around COVID-19 response. Happy to take any questions. And thank you for your time.
Thank you so much for that presentation. Let me check in the chat. Okay, I have a question. There are some questions. I just have a question real quick. So I was wondering the role that biotech can and will be playing, I guess, in the future, looking at equitable distribution of the vaccine, not just across the United States, but kind of looking at like other countries, especially in Africa and South Asia.
So the question is, what role will biotech play?
Yeah.
In that, so actually, I think it's one of the things I'm most proud of. If you look at the companies with early who came with vaccines earliest, they also really executed on a global strategy for regional partnership. So if you look at AstraZeneca, or you look at even a small company like Novavax, whose vaccine will probably come in another month or so, these companies actually partnered with fantastic developing country vaccine manufacturers to make sure that they were making doses closest to the various regions of the world. So Novavax, for example, has a partnership with Serum Institute of India, which is a premier vaccine manufacturer in India. Other companies have partnered with South Korean firms, Brazilian companies. There are some companies that are doing what we call fill finish. They're like filling the vials and packaging them in South Africa. I think we'll have many more of those kind of partnerships over the next few months, where all the companies really committed to, if my vaccine doesn't work, I'll help make yours. And I think that's helping us get vaccines out as quickly as we can, knowing that these vaccines are relatively complicated. Like the mRNA vaccine has got like 200 different parts made all over the world, and you need to get them all to the same place and make the vaccine. So I think there's been wonderful partnerships globally, and I hope we're going to see even more vaccine closer and closer to people. And what that'll mean is those partnerships will endure. So the next vaccine will come, you'll go to that partner and launch the vaccine there.
Thank you. One question in the chat. We all recognize how COVID-19 mass vaccination can be a silver bullet to ending the pandemic. However, at the same time, many Americans of color like myself are somewhat fearful of mass vaccination, given the long history of racial eugenic warfare waged by the American government, like the Tuskegee experiment, La Operación, even the measles vaccine experiments against Black and Latino children in the late 1980s, along with many CDC lawsuits since then. Have there been big initiatives to launch Black and Latino COVID-19 vaccination clinics to gain public trust from people of color?
Did we lose her again?
Mr. Arthur, you might be frozen.
Is is it frozen again?
Yeah, it appears so.
I'm sorry, ask your question again.
Oh, no worries.
I heard the part about Tuskegee and Henrietta Lacks, and so
Yes. The question was, have there been big initiatives to launch Black and Latino COVID-19 vaccination clinics to gain public trust from people of color?
absolutely. Actually, that's one of the things that we really worked on a great deal. So one of the organizations on the slides is called the Black Coalition Against COVID-19, set up originally here in DC. They actually have been advocating strongly with the CDC and the Biden administration to use as many community-based and faith-based organizations as vaccination sites as possible. And it goes exactly at the issue that the person just raised, which is the best way to have people feel comfortable where they're getting vaccinated is to go to a trusted site and have a trusted person vaccinate them. And so I think you're seeing a lot more use of community-based and faith-based organizations as vaccination sites. So people are coming to their own community place. And you saw the same thing with testing, where actually the most successful testing sites were those in the community that people knew and could go to. I think you're going to see even more of that as the supply situation loosens up.
Thank you. Another question. What are the main reasons for such variety and levels of information and validity regarding vaccinations across the globe? And how does BIO ensure each company it supports ensures the appropriate dissemination of vaccination information?
Great question. So I think that if you look at information from the scientific and medical community, so health departments of countries, generally companies themselves, academia, you'll find the information is pretty much the same. I think what happens is there are some people who misunderstand certain things and therefore put forward misinformation. They hear a rumor, how people talked about AstraZeneca and the blood clots is a good example, right? Where they talked about it without understanding the background rates of actual blood clots in the population. And once we started talking about whether or not that number was outside the normal, we got back to, okay, no, this is actually about normal what we see without the vaccine. It's not about the vaccine. I think that's one kind of thing. But there's also, unfortunately, people out there intentionally sowing disinformation, and that's bad information, not based on science. And you really have to be able to trust the source you're looking at. And I think, unfortunately, there are people that want to just sow distrust in the vaccines themselves, not just COVID, but other vaccines too. I saw someone asked about anti-vaxxers in the chat as well. And we work on that in our spare time all the time, which is generally anti-vax activities and anti-science activities. So I think that we need to really make science easier for people to understand and be honest about what we know. But I think what we've learned in this last year is it's actually most important to have someone people trust tell them the right information. And the fact that the Hispanic Medical Association and then the African American, the National Medical Association are all over these educational activities is super important, because people then see that people that look like them are involved in the research, they've looked at the product, they've trusted it, and they say it's okay. I think we've never really done that before, and we have to do that moving forward.
Yeah, thank you so much. That is all the time that we have.
You
There
have
were
another speaker.
questions. So if you can you see the chat function?
I
Okay.
can see the chat.
Okay, cool. So Dr.
Actually, if you want to just send them to me,
Yes, I can.
just cut them out and send them. I can certainly talk about what we're doing about anti-vaxxers. We have a bunch of different initiatives there, and just type you guys back an email if you'd like with some of the answers. Great questions.
Sounds great. I will definitely do that and get
Oh,
answers.
did I cut out again? Probably did.
That's all the time that we have. Thank you so much again, Phyllis. Dr. Weissman is up next, and I will let Niall introduce him.